Erwin Mark Jacobs, an American, born in 1933, as we mentioned, in scrappy New Bedford, Massachusetts, which used to be, I believe, the wealthiest town in America during the whaling era, as we discussed during Standard Oil or Berkshire. I think it was Berkshire, actually, that we discussed.
It was Berkshire because 45 years before Erwin Jacobs was born in New Bedford, the Hathaway manufacturing company was started
in New Bedford.
That's
right.
Before it merged with Berkshire, and before, of course,
even
Buffett
by 1933, New Bedford was not the New Bedford of the whaling era, shall we say. So Erwin is a pretty amazing American story. So he grew up in like a very middle-class family in this super scrappy area of the country. His dad worked a bunch of jobs and ended up running a local restaurant called the Boston Beef Market. Erwin was highly gifted in math and sciences as a kid going through school. He wanted to study math and science, and probably would have wanted to study engineering if he knew it existed in college. But his high school guidance counselor famously told him that there's no future for math and science in New Bedford. And frankly, his high school guidance counselor was probably right. So Erwin, though, had very good grades growing up. And the guidance counselor encouraged him to go to the world-famous Cornell School of Hotel Management so that he could learn the hospitality management business and come back and work in the family business at the Boston Beef Market.
Which he did.
He did go to the School of Hotel Management.
This engineering genius, this American pioneer of the wireless and communications industry, that is what he went to college for.
And he would later credit the year and a half that he spent in the hotel management school at Cornell before transferring to electrical engineering. He would credit that year and a half with really helping him start first Linkabit, his first company, and then Qualcomm, get out of academia and become an entrepreneur, because he actually learned about business, accounting, the real world applications, and found that he kind of loved that too.
Yep.
Amazing. So after a year and a half at Cornell in the hotel management school, he learns about engineering and is like, oh, you can make money with math and science. This is actually in demand. Maybe not in New Bedford, but in the rest of America. And so he goes to the dean at Cornell. He tells this story, and he's like, hello, sir. I sophomore at Cornell. I would like to transfer from hotel management to electrical engineering. And the dean's like, oh, you mean electrical engineering to hotel management, right? And he's like, no. Hotel management to electrical engineering.
No, I want to do the harder one.
I want to do the hard stuff. After the dean picked himself up off the floor, he allowed it, perhaps with a degree of suspicion, which he need not have, because Erwin is another genius in this string of geniuses. He would graduate, go on to a PhD at MIT, which he would do in 3 years, finishing his PhD in 1959, studying under none other than Claude Shannon himself, who after the war returned to MIT as a professor.
It's pretty interesting because so many of these stories that we tell, there's an immense element of genius. No question, Erwin Jacobs and Jensen at NVIDIA and Steve Jobs, geniuses. And also,
there were 10 people in the world who knew this stuff at the time, and they were among them.
Yeah, it's the most incredible right place, right time in history too. Because without studying under Claude Shannon, the father of information theory, it's extremely unlikely that Erwin Jacobs becomes the Erwin Jacobs he went on to be.
Totally. And then, without what's going to come later in Hedy Lamarr, that he would start Qualcomm. Amazing. So Erwin is so talented that after he finishes his PhD in 3 years, mere 5 years removed from being a hotel management major at Cornell, and Shannon and MIT ask him to stay on as a professor at MIT, immediately, which he does. He spends 5 years teaching at MIT, during which he teaches the first course for students on digital communications in the world, I believe, applying Shannon's theories to like disseminate amongst like practical engineers being trained at MIT.
Yep.
He and a fellow faculty member write the first textbook on digital communications that is still in use today. You can still, like, it is the Bible of digital communication theory. You can buy it on Amazon, and written by Irwin, distilled, from the father himself of Claude Shannon. He spends 5 years teaching there. And then in 1964, he takes a sabbatical and heads out to California to do a sabbatical at JPL, at Jet Propulsion Labs, working on the U.S. space program and communications with satellites in the U.S. space program at the time, where he intersects, fatefully, with another recent MIT electrical engineering PhD grad, one Andrea, or Andrew, as it was anglicized, Viterbi, a Jewish immigrant from Italy who got his PhD from MIT in 1957, who was working at JPL, and they become fast friends. So fast friends, in fact, that when Irwin returns back to Boston, to cold, snowy, bleak Boston near his upbringing in Massachusetts, after his sabbatical, Irwin then gets a call shortly thereafter from one of his former professors at Cornell that a new engineering school in San Diego is being started, the new UC San Diego, and there's an opportunity for Jacobs to come out and start the electrical engineering department at UCSD. He says, well, I really enjoyed my time out there. I've got this great friend, Andy. Let's do it. I would make the exact same decision. So he and his family, Irwin and his family, move out to UCSD. And while he's out there, he continues doing his contracting work with defense contractors and JPL and the U.S. space program.
And this is sort of one-off at this time. I mean, he's like doing it under his own name. He hasn't really started a company. It's just kind of Irwin doing contracting.
Totally. He is like the first, like electrical engineering professor at UCSD. That's his full-time job. But because he's in such close proximity to everything going on at JPL and NASA and the like, he's doing that on kind of like 1 day a week-ish. And one day, he and Andy and another professor from UCLA are up at NASA Ames in Mountain View doing consulting work up there. They're flying back, and they're all kind of lamenting. They're like, this is super cool that we're doing this. We're making more money than academia. We're helping our country. We're participating in the space race. But it's kind of hard to like balance all this stuff that we're doing.
Yep.
And they're like, hey, what if the three of us band together and form a company, kind of a shell company, to just kind of manage this consulting work that we all get? We could probably get some, efficiencies here, maybe hire an assistant, help us out, that kind of stuff. And they say, great, we don't intend this to be a real company. We're not going to make any products or anything. This is just to manage our consulting. They sort of tongue-in-cheek decide to call it Link-a-Bit, like linking a bit. It's a very like academic joke. So who is this third partner in Link-a-Bit? He ends up not kind of gelling with the other two, leaves shortly thereafter. His name is Len Kleinrock. And I read that the first time and I was like,
I've heard that name before.
I know that name.
And I'm going to guess 99% of listeners haven't heard that name, but if you're you and me and all we do all day is study tech history and the history of the internet, that name should ring a bell.
Yeah. Well, at first you read this history and you're like, man, bummer for Len. He missed out on founding Qualcomm. Well, he actually ended up okay because instead of founding Qualcomm, he founded the internet.
He literally was I think the founding engineer on the ARPANET project at DARPA.
Many people were involved in the ARPANET project.
I guess at ARPA? I don't know if it's...
ARPANET, yeah. ARPANET, which was the precursor to DARPANET, which was the precursor to the internet. Len and one of his grad students at the time at UCLA, like the next year, right after this has happened, this is all happening at the same time, they sent the first message on ARPANET ever, like the first internet transmission ever from UCLA to Stanford. He's one of the core founding fathers of the internet. So he ended up doing okay. He probably didn't make as much money, but he will be remembered in history. Pretty amazing. So Andy and Irwin, they're mostly continuing to work on NASA and Navy defense projects in San Diego because, of course, San Diego is a U.S. Navy town. And most of what they're doing is working on satellite communications. If you know anything about satellite communications, the bandwidth that you have available to you is very, very narrow.
Yep.
And you need to be very, very efficient with your communications.
And that's still true to this day. I mean, any company in the sort of emerging space economy, it's a totally different engineering problem than you're used to today. Because if you ship code up to your satellite and you find a bug, it's like very expensive and very slow to go get enough bandwidth and actually make sure you have the right time window to update the code on the satellite. So it still kind of works the way that computers worked 30, 40 years ago.
Yep. And so it wasn't them. Like, this was the military that was this. They got exposed to this, trolling around to find the best, most efficient ways to use this narrow bandwidth channel that they had. And what ends up getting used but this old patented spread spectrum technology from the World War II era, invented by Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil.
And the timing is perfect because the time of Linkabit is this sort of early 80s where
early 70s.
Oh, Linkabit's early 70s? So they had
late 60s,
15
early 70s.
years of Linkabit before.
Oh yeah. There's a long. Linkabit is involved. You might not know. I've got some good surprises for you.
All right.
So they start doing more and more of this. Irwin's exercising the hotel management sort of side of his brain as he's doing this. He finds that he really enjoys it. They start bringing on other professors, other grad students into Linkabit to kind of build this sort of army of the greatest, information theory and wireless signal minds in the country.
All for defense contracting.
Almost all for. I don't think they were doing any commercial work at this point. I think it was all NASA and defense.
Yep.
And almost all satellite work. And so they start building the company that eventually, in 1971, there's so much going on, Irwin decides he's going to take a sabbatical from UCSD and spend a year just organizing the company. He ends up never going back to UCSD ever, because during that year, they get the idea, I believe it was during this year, maybe they'd start to have inklings of it before, that it's really nice. They've got all this technical talent. They're consulting on these projects that defense contractors mostly are the prime bidders for. They're like, wait a minute, those guys are making all the money. We're doing all the differentiated engineering work here. What if we started bidding on some contracts ourselves? We would probably make a lot more money as a kind of product, contract focused services company ourselves, rather than just as a sub consultant on these projects.
And that lesson persists to this day too. If you can pull off being the prime contractor to the government on a big contract, the economics are much better than if you get subcontracted by one of the primes.
If you can be a prime, the primes back then, primes being prime defense contractors, they're still the primes today. That is a gravy train that Raytheon, Lockheed, Boeing, all these companies. So of course they start doing this, but there's a reason the primes then are the primes now. Linkabit is not going to be a prime then or ever. So they need to, if they're going to do this, they need to move into the commercial sphere. So this is one of these just so good. It's like history was made for Acquired. Do you know what the first contract project that Linkabit did was? If you knew, you would just be
No, I don't.
smiling so wide right now. So they hear about, remember, their expertise is in satellite communications. They hear about a regional retailer.
No. Did they do Walmart's satellite network?
Yeah, they did.
What?
Yeah, they hear about this eccentric founder of this small Midwestern regional retailer that for some reason wants to beam himself talking every day to all of, from HQ to all of the local stores of this, local outlets of this retailer. Linkabit's first project is doing the satellite communication system for Walmart.
That's wild. Listeners, for anyone who didn't listen to our Walmart episode, Walmart was for a very long time the most innovative retailer on the planet. I mean, until Amazon, basically. And one of the illustrations of this is in the late 70s and then continuing into the early 80s when they actually lit it up. They invested tens of millions of dollars into building a private satellite relay because the bandwidth available on the internet was insufficient for them at the time.
Oh, there was doing it. It was just the ARPANET. It was Kleinrock doing it.
Phone lines. The public WAN, effectively, or a precursor to WAN, was insufficient to send the store data that they had actually been collecting and want to tabulate their results on a daily or weekly basis, but also this
Sam wanted to broadcast out the Saturday meetings. So great. Wait, there's more Walmart to come a little later in the episode. Stay tuned. Literally. So
God, you just crack yourself up.
This is fun. We'll probably cut this from the actual episode. Occasionally we get these reviews for Acquired or comments that one host is really normal and the other host is just
laughs at his own jokes.
Crazy person. And I'm like, well, at least they remember me.
We are who we are. Nothing's changing. At 7 years in, we're not. Yeah.
I promise you, it's not an act. Ask my wife.
Who got the truth? Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? Sit me down, say it straight. Another story on the way. Who got the truth? Who got the truth now?